And let me do my screen share. Okay, so I've got my screen share going, where you should be able to see my my window that's got, once again, like I introduced yesterday, we have our file menu up here in Snap, which is like the little paper icon that your students can use to open and save files. You have the cloud icon, which is used to log in and log out. If a student has been working on a lab and they're actually discover that they're not logged in, they actually can go back and log in, and it will not erase their work. So I encourage students to always check that they are logged in. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my cloud. I'm going to log in with the account. If you made the account yesterday, again, username and password. Very straightforward. And what I wanted to do with this session is I wanted to introduce like some more of our programming, just some of the different features that you have here in Snap that some people had experience with Java, some had experience with Python. So some of you may already know the basics of coding or the principles behind programming. I want to kind of show you where you can find all that stuff in Snap. And in doing that, I'm going to kind of go through a very basic program with you. This is mostly for those that have no experience with Snap and you really want a pretty quick overview. Again, this is being recorded. Okay, so what I want to do is let's just start a brand new file. I'm going to go to the file icon. Again, you can either just watch me or you can follow along on your own screen, although it might be a little difficult to sort of toggle between seeing my screen and then seeing your own screen. So it's kind of up to you. But let me go ahead and go to File, New. It didn't do anything. It just still says Untitled, because if we want to actually give it a title, we want to go back to the File menu and then Save As. Save As, so we can go ahead and give it a name. And I'm just going to give this a name. I'm going to call it Demonstration. Reminder, you want to save everything to the cloud. Don't ever save it to your computer. Hit Save. And now we're in a new lab. We're in a new file called Demo. You can select different costumes for your sprite. So right here, selected on sprite, I can go here to costumes and sort of do like a little paint program, or I can actually import an image by dragging and dropping it here if I want to. But if you want to use one of the predefined character costumes, you can go to the file menu. And I can go all the way down. Second last one is called costumes. And under costumes, I'm just going to grab, I'm going to show you the different costumes that they have available. And I'll just kind of grab a random one here. Let me just grab this bear right here, this little polar bear. Hit import. Then I'll hit cancel to get out of the costumes menu. So you can see the sprite then gets replaced by this little bear icon. If you do things like we did yesterday with the move commands, the turn commands, or the go to random point, it will do that here with your polar bear. Okay, that's not the main goal of this. The main goal is to introduce you to some of the main concepts behind programming, and that is the concepts of input and output, a conditional statement, or what's called an if statement, a simple loop, and hopefully, if I get a chance, showing you how to create your own custom block. So let me start off by doing this. I'm going to go to Control, and I'm going to go ahead and drag this coding block. It says when green flag clicked. It's pretty much like how we start most of our, if not all of our programs. And like I introduced yesterday, or if it's the first time you're seeing it, we're going to click here in the corner where it says looks. Not too worried about costumes or anything, but I want a command that is a basic output command. If you've ever done programming before, you know output is just basically communicating words or saying words to the user of your program. So I'm going to grab this block that says say hello for 2 seconds. And instead of saying hello, just so I can show something different here, let's say something that we like to repeat a few times, right? Like let's do a phrase like hip hip hooray. Yeah, so I've edited the text in my dialog box to say hip hip hooray. And we normally say that. We normally do it, we say it 3 times, right? Like think about hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray. So here's something that your students are going to learn pretty quickly. There's something called a repeat block. Let me go back up here to control, which has what are called my control structures. I can find all my loops about halfway through the screen. You have a forever loop. There's one that just says the word repeat. Now I'm going to grab that, move it over here, and basically, and this is a good introduction to what's called iteration or loops. I'm going to use this. I'm going to change it from a 10 to a 3. Right, and I kind of have it detached so that I can go ahead and drag in this say command. And as you can see, it's sort of inside, sort of wrapped inside that repeat block. So if I attach all these 3 things, what's going to happen if I click on the green flag? It says hip hip hooray for 2 seconds. Then it repeats it. As you might guess, it's going to repeat that 3 times for us. You can attach more than one code segment inside of this loop, and it's going to do everything exactly 3 times. Right? And this is one of your first forms of loops that you're going to introduce to the students. Okay, let's get some user input. And to do that, I'm going to use a block called ask. I'm going to click on sensing, kind of a lighter blue corner. And see the block here that says ask what's your name and weight. Let me grab one of those. And not just that block, but let me also grab this other little, it looks like an ellipse or an oval, and it says answer. Let me grab that, and I actually want to put it off to the side. Now, this is something else that you can talk to your students about. You can have code, you can have like blocks all over the place in this, what we call the scripting area. As long as they're not attached to anything else, they're not going to be triggered, they're not going to do anything. Now, what's answer? Whatever is typed in by the user after they get a prompt for this ask, whatever they type in is going to be stored into what's called a variable. I'll teach you how to make your own variable as well. And it's stored in this variable called answer so that we can so that the program can remember that. It's a named location in memory. All right, instead of saying what's your name, let's actually ask a real question. Let's ask, how many years have you been coding? Once again, I'm editing the text in my ask to say, how many years have you been coding or programming? You can use your own language if you want. You can put like 15 exclamation points. Whatever you write, it's going to appear on the screen. Now, whatever's typed in as an answer, again, is going to be stored into this variable here called answer. I want to actually do something else. I want to create a new variable. And once again, variables are just ways of storing information, whether it's a name, whether it's a number. If you could, again, watch carefully how we do this. I want to go to my little tab here that says variables. Right? The very top thing is going to say make a variable. You have to do this, and again, it's a drag and drop style language, so declaring a variable, for those of you that have experience programming, you have to do this process in order to make a new variable. Okay, so I'll say make a variable, and I'm going to call it, let's call it number of years. Now, there's a couple things that I want to point out. Your students can actually put spaces in the names of their variables. I always encourage them not to, because when they get into other programming languages like Java, which is the next course, Python, C++, they're not going to be allowed to have spaces in their variable names. But one of the things that we use in computer science is this thing called camel case. If you can see my screen, we basically shove a bunch of words into one, but every time we have a new word, we capitalize that letter. So I've got number, capital O, of capital Y, years, with no spaces. I try to drill that into them so that they know that when they use other programming languages, they usually can't use spaces. All right, it's going to say for all sprites, that's the default. We're just going to hit OK. So what happened? Now I see number of years on my actual programming screen, right? And it's tracking, it kind of defaults it to be a value of 0. So how do we change that? We use a command called set. I'm still in variables. I go down here to set, drag it underneath ask. And what I really want to do is set my variable I just made called number of years and set it to whatever the answer just was. So if you can see my screen, there's like a little drop down right here. And you can select your variable. You can also select under the word my, you can say different things relating to this sprite, like their X location, their Y location. We're not going to worry about that too much right now. But I can select number of years, right? Because I made that as a variable. And then I can just drag in this little block that says answer. I can put it over directly over where it has 0 to kind of cover it up. Now, what can we do with that? Well, before we move on, let's just make sure it's actually working. So what we can do is every time, and please encourage your students to do this as well. Every time you make a change to your code, rerun your program, again, by clicking on the green flag to see exactly what changes you've made. So let me click my green flag and watch the corner of my screen to see what's happening in my program. I click it. He says, hip, hip, hooray. He does it exactly 3 times. Okay, and then it kind of gives a pause. It says, how many years have you been coding? I have an input window now where I can type, and I can put the actual answer to this for me, which is about 22 years. Yeah, I started programming when I was 15, and I'm 37, so 22 years. I could hit enter, I could hit check. And what happened is now that number 22 gets stored into this variable that I made called number of years. And that's it. Like that's the only thing we've asked our program to do so far. And you can kind of see on screen, like it's displaying the value of the variable number of years. And let me do my screen share. And what happened is now that number 22 gets stored into this variable that I made called number of years. And that's it. Like that's the only thing we've asked our program to do so far. And you can kind of see on screen, like it's displaying the value of the variable number of years. Okay, there's a reason why I did this, because I wanted to introduce how to use the if and the if-else statements, meaning depending on what you just typed or what your user just typed into this program, you can do different things. Or we can use different output. You'll see what I mean here in a second. So once again, I'm going to go to control. And underneath the loops, you will see 2 different blocks. And I want to point this out. There's a block that just says the word if, right? And let me actually grab one of those. I'll just kind of put it on the side. I've got another block, which is a little bit different. It says if, and then it has the word else. Let me grab one of those, and I'll also kind of put that off to the side here. And in doing this, I want to introduce you to, again, what's called a conditional statement. That's if this is the case, if this thing is true, then we execute some part of the code. If it's not true, it just kind of skips over it, and it doesn't worry about it. In doing that, I can also introduce one other concept, which was mentioned in the slides before, something known as a Boolean expression. And that is just anything that we can determine that is either true or false. Okie doke. So let me show you how to build one of those real quick. we want to go to this little green section that says operators. Operators. And if I scroll down a little bit past the pick random block, you should see 3 different blocks that actually are like shaped kind of like a hexagon. They've got like corners instead of being like round. This is another thing that you'll like a lot about Snap. The blocks are shaped the exact way that they fit into the other blocks. So right after the word if here, it's got that shape of like, it looks kind of like a little hexagon, right? So I can grab this equal sign block and take it and just drag it right here after the word if. And then we can do a comparison. Let me actually attach this if. And what we're doing here is I'm showing you a few things. I showed you a basic loop. You're going to see a lot of those, especially in the first few labs. Showed you input and output, how to create a variable, how to store a number into that variable. And then now we're going to do a little bit of logic as far as like decision making. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say if my number of, I'm going to say it out loud first. If my number of years is equal to 0, right? If I have no programming experience at all, I'm going to send out a little message that says something like, welcome to computer science. So how do I do that? I can drag in from variables. I can drag in my number of years. Make sure it's like the circular shaped one. You can find it right near the top of variables. Oops. And then I can literally type in the number 0. I can say if number of years equals 0. And I'm just going to show you how to do like a different, he's going to say a different statement if I have no programming experience. So I'm going to go ahead and get a say block from looks. And I'm going to put it inside of this if statement the same way I had this hip hip hooray inside of the repeat loop, where I'll say, welcome to CS, right? Welcome to computer science. I know you have 0 years of experience coding. That's what I'm going to say to you. This structure, again, we call a conditional statement. So if that is true, it's going to say those words when you run your program. If it's not true, it's going to completely skip over that. And that's when I'll get more into the if else. But let's test it out. So I'm going to go click on my green flag. Yeah, he does his hip hip hooray. And what's happening here is, again, it's executing the code top to bottom. When you have an if statement, if this statement ends up not being true, it's just going to skip over the next command. So how many years have I been coding? I'm going to test it out, so I'm going to put 0 and make sure it works. I've been coding for 0 years. Enter, and it says, welcome to CS. Now, if I run the program again, I didn't make any changes, right? But if I run my code again, and I type out any number that's not 0, like 22, well, what happens? Nothing happens. And that's one thing that I wanted to get across here is you have 2 different types of what's called selection or conditional statements that you can make. You have one, like I just did, where if this statement is true, say this. If it's not true, do nothing. Then you've got another type of if statement, which I'm gonna show you how to use that as well. If you're looking at my screen and you're kind of falling behind, you're like, oh, I need to find out where to find these blocks. Remember, Snap is color coded. So if you're like, oh, I don't know where you got the equal sign from, it's the green block. So go to your green operators and look for that equal sign. All right, speaking of this, we're actually going to use a math thing, a less than or a greater than sign. So let me do this. I'm going to attach this if else. I still want the if there. Okay, I still want the if, but then in addition to that, afterwards, adding on to the code, I'm gonna ask another question to my computer is gonna ask another question. And I'm gonna use let's use the first one. Or you know what, let's use the last one, greater than sign. Right, you got a less than sign, then you got an equal sign, then you got a greater than sign. Okay, so what am I gonna ask here? I'm gonna ask, well, what if my number of years coding is greater than 5, right? I want to say, hey, that's impressive. I want to give out a little message that says, wow, you've been coding for a long time. So let's practice doing this. In the if statement, again, I can drop in my variables over here, or I can type in numbers. I want to grab from variables, grab my number of years, and we'll do another test. Again, this is what's called a Boolean expression, something we can evaluate as either true or false. So let's just type in a 5, right? If my number of years coding is greater than 5, just do another output. Let's do another looks. Grab a say block and say, wow, coding champion or something, some sort of positive message here. And let me introduce you to else. Else is basically, it's just another word for otherwise. Think of it logically like otherwise. If this is true, it's going to execute this part of code. If it's not true, or otherwise, if your number of years is not greater than 5, it's going to do another code segment, which I'm just going to grab another say. Again, that's my basic output statement. And let me say, keep on coding. Give like a little motivational message there. All right, run the program, or I'm going to run the program here on my screen. And let's see what happens. So we got hip hip hooray being repeated 3 times for 2 seconds each. Now I've got my ask command, and it's saying how many years have I been coding. Let me say I've been coding for 7 years. Hit enter. And it says, wow, coding champion. So what you should notice is it did not say welcome to CS, because my number of years is not 0. Totally skipped over that. Now, it did say my number of years was greater than 5. 7 is greater than 5. Came out to be true. So it said, wow, coding champion. And then it skipped over this other segment right here. So once again, my point in doing this is just to introduce you to several other things that you're going to see down the line. Part of what I'm doing here is just giving you a very short overview of how all these different functions work. And let me do my screen share. So once again, my point in doing this is just to introduce you to several other things that you're going to see down the line. Part of what I'm doing here is just giving you a very short overview of how all these different functions work. I want to show you one more thing. Comments are something that you can add, which are just basically little labels, which you can encourage your students to do. Every programmer, and if you've been a programmer before, we use comments to just sort of communicate what pieces of code do, or to kind of label things. It's a way of, you can tell your students, it's a way that programmers communicate to other programmers if the code is somewhat confusing. You're going to find out that it makes a lot of sense. The words in English make a lot of sense, right? Like you can see if number of years equals 0. Even if you've never seen snap before, you can kind of infer what that's going to do, right? It's going to test to see if our number of years is 0. And if it is 0, it's going to do the following command, right? Then we have the if else part. Let's see. Let's see how to make a comment. Very, very simple thing. Anywhere in this scripting area, which again is all this sort of like this place that has the vertical lines. Just right click anywhere and you can select add comment. And you'll see what happens. It makes like a little sticky note. Say add comment, and I'm going to label some of these programming concepts that we just went over. Here's what I'll do. For a comment, it does not matter at all what you write in a comment. The computer does not read comments. It only programmers and, well, teachers who teach programming will be the ones reading comments. So output, if I just want to kind of label this, I can actually drag this little sticky note right on top of something like the say block that says hip hip hooray. And then it sort of attaches that comment to that particular code segment. So it's just saying, okay, we have output, general output to the screen in this one command. Okay, I'm gonna keep doing this because I want to actually label some of these vocabulary words. I'm gonna add another comment. And I'm gonna give you two words here. The easy one is loop. The more academic vocabulary word that you need to stress in your class is iteration. Sort of attach that here to the repeat. And a little bit of overlap here, but you can still see that it's pointing to the repeat statement. Repeat this 3 times, and it's just pointing out what is that? It's a loop. Okay. One of the first things that you do is just some simple loops. Okay, let me finish this out. Almost done here. Let me add a comment to label my ask block as user input. There we go. I can actually zoom this in a little bit. Yeah. If my screen, sorry. My screen was a little small. I can do something like this. Okay, so we had the output statement, we had a loop, we had an input statement. Right here, I'm going to label this if command and give you the word that your students are going to need to know, and that is selection. Okay, we sometimes call these conditional statements. For AP Computer Science Principles, your students need to be familiar with the word selection. I'm going to put that where the if is. There's a really good reason why I'm introducing these vocabulary words to you right now. They don't have to worry about it for a while, but you might want to mention it toward the beginning of the year. Your students are going to have to create an original project. It's due at the end of April. We'll get a lot more into it later, but their project has to have things like input, output. It has to have a loop, or it has to show iteration. It has to have selection. So in doing this little activity with you, I'm just introducing those concepts, again, those programming concepts to you. Make sure you know iteration, selection, and sequencing are actually vocabulary words in our first unit of study. Okie doke. This is a little too zoomed in. Zoom out a little bit. I want to also point this out. Sometimes students get confused as far as where is their actual program code, which is this stuff that you can see right here in the middle of the screen. This is their code, whereas the program itself, the actual program that they're running, whether you want to call it an app, because it is an application software, or you want to call it a program or their project, that is in the corner of the screen right over here. That is the only thing that at the end of the day has to be working correctly. And then you can actually full screen it as well. You can click on these little arrows next to the green flag. And let's do that real quick just to show to show students that like they don't always have to be looking directly at their code. What their end product is, what their user, whoever uses their program, is going to be able to see is whatever's in the corner here. So look, let me full screen that. And this right here, this is your student's program. This is a computer program. I hit the green flag to start it. Okay. I've got hip, hip, hooray, hip, hip, hooray. Cool. How many years have I been coding? Let's try it out. Let me put a 0, right? And see what's going to happen if I put 0. Enter. And it does say welcome to CS. It also says keep on coding, right? It was equal to 0. We did that test. So it knew to say, oh, welcome to CS. You have 0 user experience. Welcome in. Then it went on to do this is a separate test, this if statement down here. If number of years was greater than 5, I'm like, you're a coding champ. And if not, I said keep on coding. So it did do 2 of these different things, right? Because 0 is also falling in this category, right? The number 0 is not greater than 5. It's less than 5. Let me put one more word up here. Add a comment. Because there's actually 3 different terms that you want to know for algorithm design. 2 of them I already went over. That is iteration, which is your loops, selection, which is your if statements, and then sequencing is just a concept that code executes. I can spell this right. Your code segments will execute from top to bottom if you put them in the correct order. That's what's known as sequencing, from top to bottom. And I can just kind of leave this node off to the side.